Most people consume content about growth and never actually grow. They read the posts, they watch the videos, they collect the motivation, and then go back to the same life. The same patterns, same excuses, same version of themselves. And this isn't it. The MindForge podcast exists for people who are serious about the mental work, the discipline, the identity, the hard internal stuff that nobody talks about honestly. And this podcast exists to go even deeper. Every episode, we take what's on the page and we crack it open. The stories behind it, the science underneath it, the application you can actually use. If you're looking for hype, you're in the wrong place. If you're looking to be challenged, to think harder, to leave every episode a little more clear on who you're becoming and what it's going to take, you're exactly where you need to be. I'm Caden Floyd. This is MindForge Podcast, brought to you by Warrior X Training. Let's get to work. Welcome back to MindForge Podcast. I'm excited for you to be here. Now, I want to be straight with you before we start because last week I told you that we were going to build the plan, right? We were picking up right where the audit left off, and I was going to give you a structured step-by-step plan. But I had every intention of doing that. I just sat down to write it, and I kept stopping. Not because the plan doesn't matter, because it does, and it's coming, but because something else kept pushing its way to the front. Something that felt more urgent than just another framework. What I kept coming back to was this. There are things that nobody tells you. Not in a book, not in a podcast, not in a mentorship program. Things you only find out by actually being in it. Building something, starting something, trying to become someone different than who you were. And I've been collecting these things quietly and turning them over in my head. And I think some of you need to hear them more than you need another set of steps right now. So this episode is a journal entry. It's a real one, written at this exact point in my journey, not from the other side of it, not from somewhere safe, but from the middle of it, which is exactly where I am. And this isn't just for entrepreneurs. It isn't just for people in fitness. It isn't for any one age group or any one kind of person. These are things that I have learned, some the easy way, but most the hard way, that I think are true for anyone who's trying to grow, build, or become something more than what they currently are. Now, if that's you in any form, this one is for you. No worksheet, no pause button, just 5 things told honestly. So let's get into it. Number 1, a lot of people have said this and I'm sure you've heard it, but nobody's coming to save you. Now, this one landed on me very slowly and then all at once. Probably when I hit 23. I just turned 24, so about a year ago. Now, for a long time, longer than I want to admit, I was waiting. Not consciously, but I didn't sit down and think. I was waiting to be rescued. But looking back, that's exactly what was happening. Waiting for the right moment, waiting for someone to believe in the idea before I fully committed to it, waiting for enough confidence, enough clarity, enough certainty that it was going to work before I went all in. And what I've learned is that none of that was ever going to show up on its own. The right moment doesn't come, it gets made. The confidence doesn't arrive before the action, it comes after, and only because you acted. Nobody is watching your life from the outside, waiting for the perfect time to hand you permission to move. This is not a harsh thing. It's actually one of the most freeing things I've ever internalized, because once you stop waiting to be saved by the timing, by someone else's belief in you, by circumstances lining up perfectly for you, you realize that the only thing that was ever standing between you and the next step was the decision to take it. This is true whether you're 22, whether you're 18, whether you're 62, 50, whether you're starting a business, starting over, getting healthy, leaving something that isn't working, or finally doing the thing that you've been circling for years. The rescue is not coming. The move is yours to make. And that's not a burden. That's the whole point. It was always yours. And once you start moving, once you actually start becoming something different, you run into this next one almost immediately. Because not everyone is going to understand what you're doing, and you have to be ready for that. You can't carry the weight of everyone's opinion. That's the second lesson. I spent a long time trying to make sure everyone around me understood what I was doing and why. Trying to explain it in a way that made sense to people who weren't where I was. Trying to get a buy-in before I'd even fully bought in myself. Now, what I didn't understand then is that the more you grow, the more your life stops looking familiar to the people watching from the outside. And some of them will get it, some of them won't. And some of them, even people who love you, will quietly resist the version of you that's changing because the old version was easier to relate to. And that's not something that you can fix with a better explanation. You can't logic someone into supporting a path they don't understand. And the more you try to make everyone comfortable with your growth, the more you end up editing yourself, pulling back, softening things, shrinking just enough to keep the peace. I've done that. I've made myself smaller in rooms so other people would feel comfortable. And every time I did it, I felt it. And that quiet cost of abandoning yourself in small ways to keep everyone around you at ease. Now here's what I want you to hear. Whatever age you are, whatever you're building or starting or walking away from, not everyone needs to clap for the path that you're on. Some people will, the right ones will. But if you make the applause the condition for moving forward in your life, you'll be waiting a long time. Walk the path and let the understanding catch up when it can. Now, this next one surprised me because I thought I was someone who valued learning, which I do. But it turns out there's a version of that that's just comfort in disguise. So let me break this down. The third lesson here is that growth requires you to keep learning after you think you know enough. Because there is a point that I think a lot of people hit in fitness and business and relationships, honestly just in life, where they've learned enough to feel content. And that feeling of contentment is comfortable, right? It's a relief after the uncertainty of being a beginner. So they stop there. Not dramatically, not on purpose, but they just quietly stop being students. And I've caught myself doing this in certain areas of my life, right? Getting to a level where things feel familiar and stop pushing at the edges, stop asking questions that might expose what I don't know, and just staying in the lane of what I've already figured out because it feels safer than admitting there is still a lot that I don't know. But here's what I've seen consistently in coaching and in building a business. The people who keep growing are almost always the ones who stay genuinely teachable. Not performatively humble, but actually willing to be wrong. Actually willing to learn something from someone who's been at it longer. Actually curious enough to keep asking. And there is a real reason this is hard. Psychologists call it the Dunning-Kruger effect. So what it is the less you know, the more confident you tend to feel. Because you don't yet know enough to know what you're missing. So the more you actually know, the more clearly you can see the edges of it. And the experts in almost any field are least likely to think they have it all figured out because they understand the size of what they don't know yet. And honestly, this applies to everything. The person who's been married for 30 years and thinks they know everything about their partner. The trainer who learned one modality and stopped there. The entrepreneur who found one thing that worked and stopped evolving their business. The moment that you decide you know enough is usually the moment you start falling behind. So stay a student, not because you are behind, just because that's how you stay in motion. Keep asking those questions, keep figuring out and adding more to your why. So, the lesson here, lesson 4, If you can't face rejection, you'll stay small. Honestly, anything in life, rejection is unavoidable, right? I don't mean that in a dark way. I mean it practically, because if you're putting yourself out there in a real way, you're going to hear no. You're going to get passed over, overlooked, turned down, and honestly, most of all, misunderstood. That's not a maybe. That's just what it costs to actually try. And what I've learned is that the people who stay small aren't always the ones who lack talent or drive. A lot of them are just the ones who decided, somewhere along the way in their life, usually after a painful no, that the risk of rejection wasn't worth it. So they stop asking, they stop applying, they stop pitching, they stop raising their hand. They stay in a lane that's safe enough to not require risking the answer they're afraid to hear. And I've been there. I've held back on things, real things, things that mattered, because I wasn't ready to hear no. And every time I did that, I was not protecting myself. I was just choosing a smaller version of the life I was trying to build. So here's what changes, though, when you start building a real relationship with rejection. It stops feeling like a verdict. A no doesn't mean you're not good enough. It doesn't mean that you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. It means that particular thing at that particular moment just wasn't the match. That's information. Use it to sharpen you. It tells you something about where you should go next, what to say differently, what to build better. The people who move fast aren't the ones who avoid rejection. They're the ones who get rejected faster and don't stop moving. So whatever you're working on, whatever the ask is that you've been putting off because you're afraid of hearing no, make it. The no you get is always less damaging than the life you stay in to avoid it. So this is the last one that's going to tie everything together, because all of these things I've just talked about, moving without being saved, releasing other people's opinions, staying a student, and facing rejection, they all require the same underlying thing. And this is it. Here's lesson 5. The life you want will ask you to let go of the life you're used to. I'm going to say this one more time. The life you want will ask you to let go of the life you're used to. This is the one I think catches people off guard the most, because we tend to think of growth as purely additive, right? We add things to our life. You gain the new thing and everything else stays the same, but that is not how this works. Every real level of growth that I've experienced has come with some sort of trade-off. An old habit that had to go, an identity I've been holding on to that stopped fitting, a version of my routine, my relationships, my way of thinking that worked at one level but became the ceiling at the next. You don't just grow into the new thing. You grow out of the old one. And that part is really uncomfortable in a way that nobody really prepares you for. Because the old life is familiar. And familiar can feel like safety even when it's quietly keeping you stuck. The late nights that became a habit, the way you used to talk about yourself, the environment that felt normal because you'd been in it so long. The friendships or patterns or comforts that aren't bad exactly, but they belong to a version of you that you're outgrowing. Letting go of those things doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like a loss. I've had to let go of things that I didn't expect to. Ways of thinking that felt like part of my identity, right? A version of myself that was easier to maintain than the one I'm building now. And every time, honestly, there's grief in it, small but real, right? A moment where the familiar thing is still right there and the new thing isn't proven yet. And you have to choose. This is true at every age and every stage of life. The person leaving a 20-year-old career for something that actually lights them up. The parent whose kids have grown and who has to rediscover who they are outside of that role. The person getting healthy who has to release the social patterns built around not being healthy. Nobody escapes this trade-off in life. The only question is whether you're willing to make it. You don't find the next version of your life. You release the version that was keeping you comfortable. And that release, as hard as it is, I know, but it is where everything in your life actually is going to start. So with all of that said, before you go, there's 5 things, right? No worksheet, no steps at the bottom of this episode. But I want to be clear about why I made this episode. It's not because the structure doesn't matter, because it does, like I said in the beginning. But it's because I think the things I just talked about are the foundation underneath everything else. You can have the best plan in the world, and if you're still waiting to be rescued, or carrying everyone else's opinion, or too afraid of rejection to actually use it, the plan will not hold together. So think of this as some sort of groundwork. The stuff that has to be real before anything else can be built on top of it. So next week we're going to come back to the build because the plan is coming, but this needed to come first. So wherever you are in your life right now, whatever you're building, starting, releasing, or just trying to figure out, I hope something in here felt true. Not just interesting, but true and relatable. The kind of true that sits with you after the episode ends. So with all of that said, take care of yourself, stay strong, the forge is on, keep becoming, and I'll see you next week. That's a wrap on today's episode. If this hit home for you, go read the companion post over on the MindForge blog at warriorxtraining.com. That's where it all starts. Every episode lives inside one of those posts, so if you want the full picture, that's where you go. Follow the show, share it with someone who needs it, and I'll see you back here next week. I'm Caden Floyd. Stay in the forge.